In a lot of these videos, we've been talking about the idea of play or experimentation and how that feeds into the design process. In this episode, we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at what that means by showcasing one of the workshops that I do in my Intro to Typography classes. What's up? MVA Joshua here. This episode is a little bit different than what we usually do. The first part of it shows the setup for the Maximalist in-class workshop. It's done in just enough detail that you can actually do the exercise. The rest of the video is the ideas that come out through the class discussion of both doing the exercise and doing the work. So there's a lot of stuff in here about working fast, how open-ended typographic work can yield new concepts that you can't get to through rational thought. And in the background the whole time, you'll see what I was working on during the workshop and how fast I try to work. This one's a little bit different. I hope you dig it. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Design a type-only piece exploring the idea of visual density, with the idea of just getting more comfortable playing with type and also building texture through typography and getting better at making something happen with only type. I would recommend Illustrator for doing this. So what we're going to do, it says copy the provided text into your document, but I decided not to provide any text. What I want you to do is use the copy from the last concert you remember going to. So whatever that is. So if it was like the day before the lockdown, it's that. And if it was like 2 years before you had a kid, it's that. Whatever it might be. So start designing a flyer with the goal of filling the available space. Once you have the feeling of, ooh, that's cool, quickly resolve it so that it's done, and then move on to another one. If you think there's still stuff to try with that option, duplicate the artboard and rework it. If not, make a new artboard and repeat. Things to explore, it's like suggestions or prompts. One would be a plain layout that fills the entire space. A visually dense composition, but using thin fonts. Because if you think density, you tend to think heavy, but can you make something that's dense using like pencil thin fonts? And then also going totally into anti-function, like not readable at all. Limit yourself to typographic matter found in the content. Don't draw shapes and don't add additional type forms. Find the content and then use that. I'm going to say an hour and 15 minutes. And you're just going to do a bunch of options in that time. Example of like the content format, here's mine. The band Juno 44, January 25th, 2020, Bottom Lounge, Chicago. So just like 3 or 4 pieces of text, because we're not really worried about function. We just want to make something fast that we don't need to be sensitive about the content or whatever. And then as you're working in Illustrator, don't have it all in one text box, like work in a way so that you can work really, really fast. And then remember, it probably doesn't need to be said, but don't wait for a concept or a clue or an idea. Just start banging stuff around. All right, I see many heads nodding, so we're in effect. And I think working fast is interesting because it's another thing that one, if you're doing stuff like this and you find it fun, not stressful, that's a thing to read into. I was like a good, bad student because I constantly had creative block and paralysis by analysis and all of that kind of stuff. But a big part of it was that I was attempting to do things the way I thought they should be done. And then it would always turn out that we would do some weird thing in class. Like, okay, you have till 4 o'clock to design a poster and then print it and we'll critique it. And I always found that stuff fun and energizing. But your semester-long project was like a nightmare that left me depressed. And I didn't realize when the thing feels right, it's like sending me a signal, do more work in this fashion. And when it feels like a nightmare drag, figure out how to make that stuff work in the way that the fast stuff works. And And so one of the things of like doing these really fast assignments is also about the idea of like, if you're doing this and you're like, this is fun, file that away and realize you may have figured out part of your working method that perhaps you're ignoring because maybe everything else you do is rewarding and meaningful, but not fun. So it's a good thing to pay attention to. I also find that the way that I design is I'm really, really rational. And if I want to surprise myself, I have to mess with the process in order to make myself do things differently than I would normally do. Because otherwise, I swear everything I make, it would just be a rectangle, and then it would be like all caps, condensed, accidents grotesque in the upper right corner, one size, and then maybe I'll put something in the bottom left corner, same size, same font. Like that's my gut instinct is just like the most boring, brutal looking stuff. So if I want to do anything out of the ordinary, I literally have to like engineer the process to make sure that I'm exploring or playing or even setting up a weird prompt that forces myself to have to try something kind of different. When you have a time constraint, all of a sudden you can't make a bunch of decisions you might normally make. So normally, like if somehow you'd ended up here, for example, you might then go, oh, I need to find a font, or like it's got a normal version, a condensed version, maybe an extended version, and they all have to be thin or ultra light or whatever. Then I can try out this thing I want to do. But once you have that constraint, you're like, I don't have 45 minutes to an hour and a half to go looking for fonts that I don't currently have. Stretching fonts is like the cardinal sin, right? Like that's like the thing you're not supposed to do. And it's like you can do it aesthetically anyway. But the other thing is if you're like, I just need to figure out if this idea works, I can't go looking for this ridiculously tall compressed font right now. But what I love about the idea of working general to the specific is you can do all this stuff and be very like experimental and very gestural. And then you could come back to it and be like, okay, I like this one. Now I can spend 30 minutes or an hour looking for a font that does this thing organically, which is like, that's another thing, like as a student or really for a long time, I didn't get. Like I'd have an idea in my head and I'd have to go find that font and not be like, okay, well, let's just like play. If I do anything interesting, maybe I'll go and find a font that does it. Or maybe I'll be like, it's fine stretched. But I wouldn't even let myself stretch something in the past because I'd be like, no, find a font that does that. But like that font and that word might not work anyway. So like, why am I wasting time thinking about things that in reality may never fully come together? That's a good example too of this idea of playing with the content and exploring what it might want to do, because you just add in like that becomes an O, and then all of a sudden it's a visual concept. It's not an actual concept, right? Like you never tell the client, oh, the concept is I changed the 0 to an O and now there's a bunch of O's and it looks cool. Except that it's the kind of thing that like if you look at it and it works, then that counts for so much. But you have to do it and explore it to even get there. Because like I don't think most of us would sit down, have this piece of text and be like, O's. Another nice thing about like formal exploration is that because it's like sort of free of concept, someone goes like, oh, this reminds me of this, or like, oh, is this intentional? And then you go, no, but now that it's there, if you have a band called the Honeydew Drops and you've got these repeating shapes that remind me of drops, I've got this arrow. I wonder if there's another arrow in this text that I haven't seen. Like you start to play with color and those arrows become, I don't know, yellow. All of a sudden you have like this very rich thing that came out of essentially nothing. If you're a teacher and you've got any questions about what we did there, or if you want to do that exercise for yourself, feel free to leave a comment if you need a little bit more information or context. Here's a clip from our next episode. It's a little bit of a Q&A from my portfolio expansion workshops, and it's about the relationship between predictability and how it causes procrastination.
Why does knowing exactly what you want to do with a project sometimes become the whole reason you don't do the project? So you're like a graphic designer. There is a part of what you do that is inherently about discovery and adventure. Even in the most boring graphic design job, just the fact that someone else comes to you and says, we need to make this thing, how we need you to make it. The fact that if they didn't come to you, you would never make that thing. It wouldn't exist. So there's like, it doesn't matter how crappy your job is, there's some semblance of that. But ideally, there's a big semblance of it. So that incorporates some bit of adventure. Now, you might stifle that throughout the process by immediately coming up with an idea, not giving any air to research or to ideation or to iteration or sketching or whatever. But at least there was something right in the beginning. The danger of what people do when it comes to portfolio pieces is because their process doesn't inherently have real research or real ideation. What a lot of people do is that they come up with the concept and the execution of it almost immediately.